The blue lights hit your rearview mirror before your brain even processes what's happening. 1 second you're just driving, maybe thinking about getting home, maybe distracted by your own thoughts, and the next second your chest tightens. You glance down at your speed, you check your mirrors again. The siren chirps once, sharp and deliberate. There's no doubt it's you. Your hands instinctively tighten on the steering wheel as you slow down, scanning for a safe place to pull over. And right there, in that moment, before the officer even steps out of the patrol car, something important has already started. Not the stop itself, but the interaction, the psychology, the assumptions on both sides. Let me ask you something, and I want you to really think about it before you answer. Have you ever been pulled over and felt like the officer wasn't being completely honest, or was pushing things further than they should? Drop your experience in the comments, because what I'm about to explain is going to connect a lot of dots, and later on, I'm going to show you why some of those instincts you felt in the moment might have been more accurate than you realized. Because here's the truth most people don't talk about clearly enough. Not every traffic stop is clean. Not every officer handles things by the book. And sometimes, the only thing that exposes bad policing is another officer who refuses to ignore it. Now picture this scenario. You're pulled over on a quiet road. The officer walks up slowly, one hand near their belt, the other tapping lightly on your window. You roll it down halfway. Do you know why I stopped you? That question right there, it sounds simple, almost routine, but it's not as harmless as it seems. It's not just about whether you were speeding or not. It's a test, a psychological probe. Most drivers immediately start talking. I think I might have been going a little fast. Or, was it my tail light? Or worse, they start guessing. And the moment you start guessing, you're doing something important without realizing it. You're giving the officer material. You're building their case for them. Now let's take it a step further. In some of these corrupt cop gets caught situations, what actually triggers the exposure isn't some dramatic moment. It's small inconsistencies. It's behavior that doesn't line up with proper procedure. For example, an officer pulls someone over for a minor traffic violation, but then they keep the driver's license and registration longer than necessary. Not just a few minutes, long enough that it starts to feel off. They begin asking unrelated questions. Where are you coming from? Where are you headed? Is that your car? Do you have anything illegal in the vehicle? Notice the shift? The stop quietly transforms from a traffic violation into something else entirely. And here's where a lot of drivers make a mistake. They go along with it, thinking they're being cooperative. But cooperation doesn't always protect you. Sometimes it invites more pressure. Now imagine another officer from a different department arrives on scene. Maybe it's backup, maybe it's coincidence. But this second officer starts noticing something. The tone, the length of the stop, the direction of questioning. And this is where things get interesting. Because good officers, ones who respect procedure, are trained to recognize when something isn't right. They understand probable cause, they understand reasonable suspicion, and they know when a line is being crossed. In several real-world situations, what exposes corrupt behavior isn't the driver arguing. It's another officer quietly observing and then stepping in. You might hear something like, "Hey, what's the probable cause for the search?" Now that's not a question civilians usually hear. That's internal language. That's accountability happening in real time. And suddenly, the tone shifts. The original officer might get defensive, they might double down, or they might try to justify what they've been doing all along. But here's what you need to understand. When an officer is acting outside proper procedure, they rely heavily on one thing, the driver not knowing their rights. Let's go back to you sitting in that car. Your window is halfway down. Your documents are in the officer's hand. You're waiting, and waiting, and waiting. Time stretches. Every second feels longer. At some point you start wondering, am I free to go? That question matters more than people realize. Because legally, a traffic stop cannot be extended beyond the time necessary to handle the original reason for the stop, unless new reasonable suspicion develops. But here's the catch. Officers are trained to look for behaviors that justify extending the stop. Nervousness, avoiding eye contact, talking too much, talking too little, hands shaking, even silence can be interpreted, rightly or wrongly, as suspicious. So now you're in a situation where everything you do is being observed and interpreted. And this is where the psychology gets heavy, because many drivers try to act normal. But what does that even mean when your heart is racing and an armed officer is standing outside your window? Some people over-explain, some people freeze, some people try to joke, and sometimes those reactions are used against them. Now let's talk about another scenario that comes up in these corruption cases. The officer asks you to step out of the vehicle. Legally, they can do that. That part is established law. But the reason behind it matters. Once you're out of the car, the dynamic changes completely. You're more exposed, more vulnerable, and the officer has more control over the interaction. Mind if I take a look inside your vehicle? That question is one of the most critical moments in any traffic stop. Because if you say yes, even casually, even hesitantly, you've just given consent. And consent removes a major layer of legal protection. A lot of drivers think, if I have nothing to hide, why not? But that thinking can backfire in ways people don't expect. What if something in your car is misinterpreted? What if there's an item you forgot about? What if the officer is already looking for a reason to escalate? And in cases where corrupt officers get caught, it's often because they bypass this step altogether. They search without proper consent or justification, and sometimes they assume no one will question it. But then another officer steps in. Did they consent to the search? Silence. That silence can say everything. Now suddenly, the situation isn't just about the driver anymore. It's about accountability between officers. It's about procedure being followed or not followed. And here's something most drivers don't realize. Body cameras don't just protect officers. They also expose them. In many of these cases, footage reveals tone shifts, inconsistencies, or outright violations. You might hear an officer say one thing to the driver and something completely different to another officer moments later. Those contradictions matter. Let's talk about tone for a second, because this is something that gets overlooked. An officer might start calm and professional, but if things don't go the way they expect, if you don't answer questions, if you assert your rights, that tone can change. It might become sharper, more impatient, more authoritative. Why are you being difficult? If you've got nothing to hide, just answer the question. That kind of language is designed to apply pressure. It's not necessarily illegal, but it's strategic. And here's where drivers make another mistake. They interpret that pressure as a sign they're doing something wrong. So they start talking, they start explaining, they start filling the silence. And the moment they do that, the dynamic shifts again. Now, let's connect this back to the bigger picture, corrupt officers being called out. When another department or officer gets involved, they're not just looking at the outcome, they're analyzing the process. How long did the stop last? What was the original reason? What questions were asked? Was consent clearly given? Was there reasonable suspicion to extend the stop? And most importantly, does the behavior match the justification? Because when those things don't line up, that's where problems start. I've seen situations where a stop that should have lasted 5 minutes turned into 20, 30, 40, all because the officer kept pushing, fishing for something. And sometimes they find something, sometimes they don't. But when they don't, and another officer reviews that situation, that's when accountability kicks in. And here's something that might surprise you. Not all officers support each other blindly. There are officers who take the law seriously, who understand that cutting corners doesn't just hurt the public, it damages the integrity of the entire department. So when they see misconduct, some of them speak up. And that's when you get those moments where corrupt behavior gets exposed, not by civilians, but from within. Now, let me bring you back into the driver's seat again. You're standing on the side of the road. The officer has your documents. Another patrol car is parked behind them. You can feel the tension, even if no one is raising their voice. You're trying to decide what to do. Do you ask if you're free to go? Do you stay silent? Do you answer the next question? Every choice feels loaded. And here's the reality. There's no perfect script. But there are patterns. There are mistakes that consistently make situations worse. One of the biggest ones is volunteering information. Another is giving consent without thinking. And another, this one is subtle, is losing control of your tone. Because while you might feel justified in being frustrated, the way you express that frustration can escalate things quickly. Officers are trained to respond to tone. If they perceive hostility, they may increase control measures. That can mean more commands, less flexibility, and a more aggressive posture. So even when you're right, the way you handle the moment matters. Now, I want to circle back to something I mentioned earlier, the idea that something important would be revealed later. Here it is. Many drivers assume that if an officer is doing something wrong, it will be obvious, that there will be a clear violation, a dramatic moment, something undeniable. But that's not how it usually happens. Most misconduct is subtle, it's layered, it's buried in small decisions that add up over time. Holding documents too long, repeating the same questions in different ways, ignoring a driver's attempt to remain silent, shifting the reason for the stop, applying pressure for consent. Each of these things on their own might not seem like a big deal, but together they create a pattern. And patterns are what expose corruption, especially when someone else is watching. So the next time you see those blue lights in your mirror, understand this. The stop isn't just about what you did or didn't do. It's about how the interaction unfolds. It's about timing, tone, and awareness on both sides. And sometimes the difference between a routine stop and a serious situation comes down to a few small moments that most people don't even realize are happening. That quiet pause after a question, that hesitation before answering, that decision to speak or not speak. Those are the moments that shape everything that comes next. And once you start seeing it that way, you don't look at traffic stops the same anymore.